So, hey everyone, happy Friday. We're going to roll the intro in just a second. Hope everyone enjoyed the calming music. Decentralized Collective said that he could do yoga to this music, the pre-show music. So I'm sorry for yoga. Yoga time's over. You're just going to have to hear me narrate instead. And Vlad with a similarly calming voice.
We're gonna stretch your mind now.
Yes.
We gave you the chance to stretch your body, and now it's time to stretch your mind. Expand the horizons of your consciousness.
Ding.
Make you one with the universe.
Ding. Yeah. Funny stuff. Yeah, this is also, I guess, the fourth media thing I've done today. I was on 3-hour-long spaces earlier. So definitely very warmed up voice by now. As always, we are live on YouTube and Odysee and X. And there's a Threadcast going on INLEO, which is on the Hive blockchain. And so if you can comment in that thing too. But basically anywhere I'm watching all the various places for comments, etc. Just let me know and bother me if I don't give you the the attention you want. And preemptive apologies for the ETH dam shilling that surely shall take place, because that's what's going to happen.
What's there to apologize? It's a privacy conference.
Yeah, that is a good point, that there's nothing to apologize for, but I'm doing it anyway. It's funny because I actually estimated that as far as the people for ETH dam, I got some tickets to give away, and also I recruited a few of the speakers there. And if you include myself and then all the tickets and all the speakers, I'm probably bringing about like 20 people to ETH dam. So there's a statistically significant number of percentage of people. I don't know how many are going to be there, but maybe if it's like 200 people, maybe I'll be like 10% of them will be my people that I brought. Wouldn't that be fun? All right. So this is probably good to get going and roll the intro. Let's get that going, and then we can dive right into the fun, spicy things. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1, go. So, hey everyone. Hi, officially. Welcome to the Digital Cash Rundown, episode 191. That means I've been doing this over 191 weeks, since somewhere early mid 2020. And I have missed a few because of things like occasional sickness or whatever. Travel. This might be the only one I do this entire month because I'm traveling a lot. I'm going to be in ETH dam this next time, and then in Toronto for Consensus and Blockchain Futurist, and then after that going to be in Basel for Crypto Basel, and then after that going to be in Vegas for the Bitcoin and Litecoin conferences. So see you in June, I guess, right, for these live streams. But I will keep on uploading podcasts I do in person. Maybe I'll get one with you, Vlad, in person, but it's also I'll see you like in a week, and so I don't know if we have new things to say. Maybe.
Well, who knows? We're gonna be at ETH dam, which is not much of an Ethereum conference, ironically, and they even said they might be rebranding for next year.
Yes, they also said that last year. I was like, let's do Crypto Dam. And they're like, oh yeah, let's do that. And then they're like, well, one more year. Maybe it's just, stuff to do. You just don't have enough bandwidth to like do that. But could be interesting. So let's just get into the official stuff. Let's get to the shilling and then the actual stuff, the actual news. So this podcast is, of course, proudly sponsored by ATM Radar. When buying crypto with cash, it's much more safe and, I guess, reliable and convenient to use an ATM than buying from some random person in a random place. And unlike an exchange, you can truly own all the crypto you buy. They're not going to freeze it once you buy it. With Coin ATM Radar, you can find crypto ATMs and other services where you can buy or sell different cryptos for cash. On their website, search by coin, address, if the ATM supports selling as well as buying, and you can also search by geographical area such as a country, state, or city. And you can check current actual fees at different ATMs around the world. So to find out more, go to coinatmradar.com, which is coinatmradar.com, which coin, ATM, those are 3 letters, and radar.com. It's not that hard to figure out, I guess. So yeah, unfortunately, when I tried last time I was in Amsterdam this March, I was trying to find an ATM close by, and the closest one was like 45 minutes outside of Amsterdam. And I emailed them and asked if they're still operational, and I never got anything back. So it's Amsterdam. I mean, the Netherlands in general is just not a very good cash society. It's not big under the cash stuff, very cashless. If you go to some businesses there and you say you want to pay with cash, a lot of them will be like, officially, we do not accept cash, but we can make an exception. And then maybe they'll just say, we do not accept cash, thank you. And then you're done. And now I just lost all my Dutch fans for all that, that awful impression. So how are you, Vlad? How's it going?
Pretty good. I did a 3-hour interview last night with Vitalik.
Yeah.
Went pretty well.
I was going to do that one later, but let me just flip to that one right now, I guess, because you mentioned it. So I'm putting up on the screen. You're on May 1st, 7:06 p.m. my time, I guess, is when you published this. Interview with Vitalik, 3 hours long. Was he really there for 3 hours?
Yeah, he was.
Nice.
And I was surprised that even so, I spoke about maybe doing an interview for 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it was obvious at one point that he wanted to leave because there was this moment of awkward silence. And then, yeah, I think this is the interview. But I asked him another question and he didn't give me a short answer. Like, he actually took the time to present every nuance involved. And yeah, we ended up with 3 hours, and that was very satisfactory because by the end of it, I realized, okay, we're both tired, we're both hungry. I think I don't have anything left to ask him, which is a shame. He's really smart. He was able to figure out some stuff on the spot, even if he had no prior knowledge about it. And very well spoken. Like, I understand why he's the creator of Bitcoin Magazine and why his first job was to write about Bitcoin in 2011. And yeah, I don't think he's overrated in some regards. He's really smart.
Yeah, for sure. And oddly enough, I know his dad better than I know him. I don't really know his dad super well, but I've interviewed him on this channel and chatted with him a little bit. But oddly enough, Vitalik did visit the Keene area of New Hampshire before he started Ethereum. So he was basically hanging out with like my friends and stuff, although I didn't happen to be there when he was there. But he was up here before, back in the Bitcoin Magazine days. And yeah, since then, it's undeniable that Ethereum is like, you could say he is the single most important living and doxed founder in crypto today. I don't know. Would you say that? Because otherwise it might be Satoshi, but you don't, unless you say it's Craig Wright, you don't know who it is.
I've had Daniel Kravis too, and he made no effort to argue in favor of Craig Wright. He was like, oh, you can just believe me because you read his articles, or else just be ignorant. But the truth is what I tell to you, and blah, blah, blah. He was like a preacher. It's disappointing to see because he's a really, really smart guy, like very well read, very articulate. And I was actually asking myself, and I'm going to get back to Vitalik, but when I was talking with Daniel Kravis about BSV and Fake Toshi, I was basically trying to have this side mission in my head, trying to figure out why he wanted to do this interview in the first place, because he knew I was not going to agree with him. But I think what he's doing there is to just expose himself to the challenge of having to defend that point of view. so that he can come up with some crazy ideas on the spot, and maybe he can revisit the material. And later, whenever someone asks something similar in their Slack or Discord or whatever they have, he's going to be able to explain it according to what he previously said. So for him, maybe it was like finding a sparring partner just to have a wrestling match and then maybe use that information later because he was able to riff on some concepts. And yeah, it's unfortunate. It's a very weird cult
Yeah.
that he's a part of.
It's very interesting because like I feel BSV is very like as far as like what the network represents, what the people who use it seem to talk about. Like a lot of it is, I would say like 70% aligned with everything that I've historically cared about with crypto in a lot of ways, but there's a lot where it goes off the rails. And as I've mentioned before, I was the person who broke the Craig Wright comes out as Satoshi news for Cointelegraph way back in the day, whenever that happened. And since it didn't take me very long to start disbelieving his claims, though. And a lot of people really go into like the detail of like, well, this person at this thing, and then he proved with his signing ceremony, and who did he dupe? There's a lot of like, I guess, data points that go into the explanation of why they think he is. But for me, like, there's a lot of stuff that I know that Satoshi did and said that you don't have to be very educated to even know, like peer-to-peer electronic cash system, permissionless intermediaries, and this and that, and a bunch of things. And then talking, like I've sparred with him on X before he blocked me. Of course, he likes to do that. He says a lot of very contradictory things to what he supposedly said in the past. And it just, I've seen scammers before. I know when I see one. It's just like, yeah, this isn't the guy, sorry. Or if he is Satoshi, then Satoshi's a scammer is kind of my point of view there.
No, but he was exposed many times being asked about some technical questions, which he got wrong. Like someone who architects the system is going to know that addresses have checksums. Something as basic as that. But he's like a DDoS attack, you know? Whenever you ask for something, you're going to get more noise, more diversions, more information, which is unnecessary for something which should be a very simple answer or a way of proving that he's correct. And it's really unfortunate that some people fell for this. The idea of gigabyte blocks is not new. It was not invented by BSV. If you go as far as 2011, there was this guy, Dan Kaminsky, who wrote on his blog that he did a presentation about Bitcoin. Dan Kaminsky was also convinced that his friend Len Sassimon is Satoshi, and it was Dan Kaminsky who inscribed like a ASCII picture of of Len Sassimon on the blockchain. That's one of the earliest instances of art on the Bitcoin blockchain. So if you search his blog, there is an article from 2011 where he put his slides from a conference presentation where he explained that if Bitcoin scales and it's going to have gigabyte blocks, then people are going to be pruning their nodes and they're going to store like 2 weeks worth of transactions. And that's still pretty good because in the 2010s, the fees for a lot of these financial services were pretty high. And Bitcoin was regarded as this way to have very low transaction fees for internet money. And that was the official narrative. That was the goal that people were trying to achieve. BSV is just lunacy. It's nihilistic in some regards. They're like, let's just dump data on this. We don't care if anyone is able to validate. Maybe it's just a couple of guys. Let's have a social media platform. Let's have a photo sharing service. Like, why would you want to put that on the blockchain for no valid reason? But they're doing it just because they want to seem like they're building stuff.
I value the existence of BSV because it's an experiment. It's an experiment in extremities or extremes, I should say. Extremities is a slightly different thing, but I enjoy seeing like, well, what happens when you put all this on chain? What are the costs? What is the actual consumer demand for this? What are the trade-offs, et cetera, et cetera? Because we've had this argument in, from the, I guess, the Bitcoin Core early days of the small block argument of there's significant trade-offs of increasing a block size past a solid 1 megabyte. Obviously, SegWit as the block weight is different than that, as without saying that. And that's kind of that one, I wouldn't say the extreme, just like I like Luke Jr.'s argument for 300 kilobyte blocks, because in my opinion, that's completely absurd. But I want to see what happens. I want to see what happens to a chain if that happens. So like you find truth in these pushing of the boundaries. So I think a lot of people learned a lot from BSV as far as what happens, how do you scale, what are the scaling bottlenecks if you do it this way, etc. And I do think that, for example, Bitcoin Cash probably wants to scale a little bit more aggressively because of the pressure from BSV. And it kind of makes that, because you say you can't do this, and then if they do it, then you can't say you can't do it anymore. You can just say, but look at all the dumb things that came along with why they did it. And then you have a clearer picture of how far you can go. So I'm very glad that people are mainnet testing Bitcoin in that way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's an interesting experiment, but at the same time, I don't like people doing it. And I don't like the fact that they attacked open source developers. They attacked anyone who's into privacy. If you look at the claims of Craig Wright, he says that supposedly, as Satoshi, he intended criminals to not be able to use it. And if you look at, of course, the claims of Craig Wright, he says that supposedly, as Satoshi, he intended criminals to not be able to use it. Very... If you look at, of course,
claims of Craig Wright, he says a little bit of an audio issue. All right. Sorry about that. People watching live are going to be pissed off, but I had a small audio issue, but more than happy.
What was the issue?
It was on my end. I accidentally got a double feed coming from your audio side.
Oh, so it was echoey.
Yes, it was like triple echoey because some of these muted tabs started to play audio. And it's like, oh, I'm trying to keep a track of the live chat and something opened up. But everything should be good now. Anyone who wants to, let me know if the sound is good. And feel free to get upset at me for the crazy audio thing. But yeah, where were we?
Well, I don't want to spend the time talking about BSV, I think.
Yes.
It's sort of a lost cause.
Yeah.
Even as an experiment, it's not that interesting.
Yes, I definitely think especially it's not that interesting sort of anymore. At one point it might have been, but we've also moved on so far from that. So to sort of wrap up the Vitalik thing. So obviously Vitalik's extremely intelligent. There's some... Did you get any good, I guess, insight into the scaling decisions of Ethereum? Because that's kind of been very front and center, just like with Bitcoin, where there was an L2 scaling pivot pretty hard on Ethereum, and then a much more successfully than Bitcoin. It pivoted to tons of L2s, and that seemed to be a net negative on the space on Ethereum itself, pushing volume and fees away. And now there's some actions such as a 5-time gas limit increase over the next few years or something like that being pushed in to kind of pull back a little bit towards the scale the base layer kind of thing. Did you get much on that discussion?
Yeah, so around the 33-minute mark. So I have the full transcript right here.
Mm-hmm.
He said that if you look at some of the layer 1 scaling ideas that we have for 2026, like something like block level access lists and statelessness and a few other things. So basically a lot of the scaling related ideas we have actually end up trying to go into the direction of trying to capture some of the benefits of the UTXO model, which is basically explicitly declaring what state you're accessing which enables parallelization and enables a lot of other things. There's also an access list based solution for like long-term state size, sys management. So we're sort of trying to move on from single thread, very naive single threaded, to something where you might call it sort of halfway point, like basically something where whoever is responsible for building the block for the first time has to add some extra information, or even people who are responsible for sending the transactions. Anyway, you can listen to this. It's around the 33-minute mark. And he explains a lot of the stuff for scaling layer 1. And there's also another point in the interview where we talk about ZK snarks, and I think it's past the first hour of the interview. It's a 3-hour recording, which I'm going to timestamp. I'm going to post that for YouTube and Spotify and whatever, so you can just get to the part that is most interesting to you.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm definitely going to poke around a little bit. But yeah, it's very interesting to see Ethereum as the darling of the space for a while, and then a little bit of a stumble recently, and we'll see where it is. Some people like Justin Bonds don't think it's going to come back, think that it's too little too late, but I guess we'll see, you know?
I think it's sort of like Bitcoin in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
It's having its existential crisis, except that nobody's challenging the leadership, saying, well, I don't think you're doing a good job, or you should be in charge of this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trust involved in the system, and they believe that whoever is in charge wants what's best for the network. It's just that Solana has been so convenient, so easy to use. The UX is stupidly simple. Like on Ethereum, to launch an ICO or whatever type of token, you had to have some knowledge, to have some basic level understanding of JavaScript, or I think their language is Solidity, which is similar to JavaScript. But for Solana, they just made Pump Fund, they made Soulflare, all of these tools which are very simple to use. So you have the average Joe launching their own meme coin and then trying to see if there's any market for that.
Yeah, it's definitely a night and day difference with that. Well, while we're talking about the drama, let's talk about the Bitcoin drama. So I'm going to put up this thing on the Filter Freakout master thread that just has, if you want to look through this the legendary crash outs, if you want to look through this thread, it's pretty funny. But basically, there was a big to do because Peter Todd in particular, but Bitcoin Core developers, right, pushed a pull request to basically end the arbitrary cap on the op return data in order to enable some certain applications that certain companies are wanting to do. And a lot of people, especially centered around the Ocean Pool kind of community and developers, pushed back on that, and then they got kind of locked from commenting on the GitHub, and then they started screaming censorship and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of the old big block community, veterans of the block size wars, have been poking back up and being a little, getting their popcorn bins out. So as someone who's kind of outside of the two, explicit big block camp or explicit, small block type person camp, have you paid attention to this, and what's been your perspective so far?
Well, it's funny because I was looking to see if I can find the thread on my phone. I didn't, so I'm not going to bother right now. But I did see the reactions from Jameson Lopp, from the Bitcoin mechanic guy who's at Grass-Fed Bitcoin, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of hilarious because that guy said, well, I couldn't think about anything for the past 3 days. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I didn't see my kids. And I'm like, nobody's kidnapping you, dude. You're just making drama because you feel emotional about what's happening with Bitcoin. Like that's a very, very deep rabbit hole within the cult, when when you're destroying your own well-being because someone proposed something for Bitcoin that you don't like. It's a very old debate, honestly. It happened like 10 years ago with the upper turn wars, when they basically decided that upper turn transactions should only have a few bytes of data. I think it was 80 bytes, which they limited for this use case. And that's what led basically to developers joining Ethereum, saying, fuck you guys. We're not going to build on Mastercoin or
Yeah.
Counterparty anymore. We'll just use this because nobody's telling us what we can and what we can't do. We'll just build what we want on a network that lets us build. And right now we have had this ordinal inscription mania a couple of years ago, and people figured out that it can be about much more than JPEGs. They can put ZK proofs inside of Bitcoin blocks, use that to start layer 2s and verify information against those ZK proofs. And I think it's a very interesting use case. It makes Bitcoin exciting once again. It enables developers to build without permission. And the reason why there was this idea of removing the limit for upper turn data is that there are some services from Marathon Holdings, for example. I think it's called Slipstream, which basically is a way for you to pay them to destroy the incentives of the Bitcoin network and include your data as opposed to picking up transaction fees. And the developers from Core were thinking, well, why don't we make this a universal protocol rule? So if someone wants to put up 4 megabytes of data, they can do that if they pay the fee for it. Why should we let mining pools make a business out of this when we can actually make it a feature of the protocol? And you have the loonies from the Ocean Mining Pool. They started out as haters of the ordinal inscriptions, and the whole ideology of their pool is that they want to fix the filters. And what that means is that they're going to run a custom version of Bitcoin Core that's called Knots, which is maintained by only one guy, and which apparently has some security bugs which are going to get revealed by some people who did some actual review. And it's very dogmatic. It's not. So Jameson Lopp is an investor in Citrea, which also happens to be a sponsor of my podcast. And Citrea is trying to do a ZK rollup on Bitcoin to enable stuff like lending and borrowing and financial services, which you find on Ethereum today, but you don't have on Bitcoin. And they want to put ZK proofs on the blockchain and build layer 2s with those. It's very ambitious. Jameson Lopp is an investor, and he came to the defense of Bitcoin Core developers because the drama, I think, started from censorship on GitHub.
Yes.
There were these guys who were outraged, and they went to GitHub and they said, well, I don't want this, blah, 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 blah. And they presented some insults and said, this guy is a shitcoiner. This person should not be considered because Core is compromised. Core is not trying to fix the filters, whatever. And there's a rule in that communication forum in the GitHub repository that says discuss ideas, not people. Don't try to insult people for doing their work. Just try to explain what you think is wrong about this. And some guys sort of crossed the line when it comes to this, and their comments got removed, and then they tried to play the victim, and they said, well, we're getting censored, and it escalated. The funny part is that Ocean Mining Pool, on average, only gets 1 block per day. So if you blink, you don't even see that they're there. They're not, they're like a drop in the ocean, pun intended. So the only moment when they're actually visible is when they turn into Karens and they scream and they say, no, I want Bitcoin to do this. I don't want graffiti on my beautiful monumental walls and blah, blah, blah. They just don't get it because their argument is ideological and Bitcoin is technical. It's an invention that just works in certain ways, and you can't find solutions for something technical with religion.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, and to be, a little self-shill thing here, I put up a post saying that the block size wars are back. They got a decent amount of traction. And kind of my point there, which I could just, summarize here, is this the sort of the Karen brigade, as it were, the ocean of Karens, is kind of, they have their roots back in the block size wars. And we obviously, like, the rehashing of the entire block size war is not something we need to do every single podcast, but I'm sure there's a certain element of this cult type mentality might have been encouraged by some people associated with the core team or Blockstream or some of those other small block elements at the time, and kind of like, you have to run your node, it's pristine, you can't have tons of data on it, like all these kinds of arguments that were used to win that block size war for the small blockers, at least for the big BTC side of things, are now, it's like a monster they created. Like now the shock troops that they created, who put the UASF hats on and did all this kind of crazy stuff, now they're the ocean pool people, and now it's not convenient to them anymore, but they're now they're like an albatross around their neck. It's like, oh man, we hired these guys, we didn't hire. Well, again, there's so much more of a Dragon's Den type rabbit hole there, but the point is, these guys were useful to the small block cause maybe in 2017, but a lot of those same people involved in Bitcoin Core, for example, and things like that at the time, are now on the other side of it, and now it's a pain in the ass to deal with these people. So do you see a little bit of corollary with that?
Well, I think the danger is that a lot of these people got onboarded with stories and narratives and metaphors about what Bitcoin is and how it should work. And they have a very poor understanding. And it's disappointing that guys like Luke Dash Jr., who honestly has not been the same since he lost his 200 Bitcoin. I would not be the same either, but for some reason
Let
he
me
went
tell you
mad.
though, dude. He was already went mad levels of crazy before he lost everything. Now it's just another gear. It's even worse.
He's rabid, and he started this mining pool, which claims to offer their participants much higher rewards, even though they don't include certain transactions. So if they collect fewer fees, how the hell do they get more rewards? I don't know. They just have this mental gymnastics where they justify by saying, well, but these transactions are not valid, they're spam. So by filtering them out, you're actually only mining transactions which are financial, and therefore you're making more money. It's very stupid. I don't know how this works. But also the most technical people in Bitcoin, like Peter Wille and who else was it? Peter Todd, and I'm not sure about Andrew Polstra, but Andrew Polstra spoke about ordinals when they first came out, and he said, there's no way for us to stop them. So might as well get used to their existence, because at least what they do in a very lightweight way. There are far worse ways of putting data on the blockchain. And this is also the argument of Jameson Lopp, because he said, well, okay, you don't like this, but there are these businesses and there are these use cases which are gonna put data on the blockchain. So if you don't want them to put it in this way, they can use multi-sigs. They can use some other opcodes, which are much more data intensive and much more computational intensive. And honestly, I think the BRC20s and the stamps, I'm not sure if you remember the stamps on the blockchain, they bloat the UTXO set, so they're stored in the RAM memory of the nodes. If they do that, the network is far worse. We're gonna be in a much worse situation. So I don't know. I honestly don't know why these people are so crazy. They're like, I think they're in the early stages of a hard fork, honestly, because they have their own mining pool, they have their own client, they have their own understanding of what Bitcoin should be. They don't want to adapt with the times. They don't think Bitcoin is cypherpunk. They think it's just for sending and receiving transactions, and that's it. And everything else is a scam and a shitcoin. they're coping very hard. I would not want to be one of them because they're gonna be on the losing side, and it's terrible. But
Yeah.
I look forward, if they do hard fork, I look forward to getting the forked coins and dumping them on the market. That's gonna be fun.
Yeah, it's what everyone loves about a good old Bitcoin block size war. Um, it's funny, someone in the live chat commented Op Karen, and I kind of like that. It's the op return is Op Karen. It is. It's kind of interesting because so Bitcoin is a in crypto, I should say, all of crypto pretty much is a monetary network, but mostly a data network that happens to have a monetary purpose. Where when you send a Bitcoin transaction, traditionally, the one thing you send is this amount from this address to that person. And that's it. Just an accounting system to transfer the data of this person gets this token, this person gets that token, kind of thing. And then you have like signatures and some op return data, some extra stuff that you can include in there. But for the most part, it's just been that. And the network thrives on being paid. Now, every crypto network, there's very few, like I think Nano is probably one of the only ones that has like completely zero like built-in fees kind of thing. There are a few that have no fees, but you have to pledge resources, which is kind of like a different subscription rather than fee, but whatever. Point is, you pay the network for using it to transmit and store data. That's literally what it is. And the difference in this argument is, well, depending on how the data storage is built, it might make our use cases harder or easier. But I guess the overarching point of Bitcoin is you have to pay the miners to run the thing. And it seems like these business use cases, whether they're good ones or not, they're kind of necessary for the future of the network because there aren't other use cases. People won't pay more than 50 cents to a couple dollars to make a payment with Bitcoin, like a regular payment for the most part. We've kind of seen that level off over the years. People will pay larger amounts for other things, though. And you need more money because you don't have more transactions on the network with the constrained block size. So something has to go into those blocks that pays enough. And it seems like this is something that will work. So what I'd like to know, listen, the Ocean Karens, obviously, I don't have high hopes for the rigor, the intellectual rigor of their arguments. But I would like to hear from their side of like, what is their plan for the future of Bitcoin? Like, how is this going to work out long term if they get their way? Ooh, did you mute yourself maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we
I
go.
was saying that it's a very good question because the biggest uncertainty in the design of Bitcoin is how you're going to have transactions over time because you need constant demand for block space.
Mm-hmm.
So if the reward for miners diminishes every 210,000 blocks, which is approximately 4 years, then you do need either for the price to double every 4 years, or you need for the fees to make up for the diminishing rewards. We did have a few times situations where the block reward was higher than, no, the fee reward was higher than the usual block reward. But the ugly truth that very few people are willing to talk about is that Bitcoin right now is secured by its monetary inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And when this inflation is going to run out, we don't have any guarantees that people are still going to want to transact on the Bitcoin network. I think Gavin Andreessen wrote a very interesting, it's like a horror story about Bitcoin on his blog. I think it's from 2021. And he described this situation where, okay, Bitcoin BTC is going to be valuable, but the miners at one point in the future, they're going to figure out that it makes no sense to keep mining this. The rewards are not so high. So they just turn off the Bitcoin network and they move BTC somewhere else and continue using it at the market price, but without the Bitcoin network itself, because it makes no sense to keep maintaining it. It's too resource intensive and it's not very useful in its current design. He's a big blocker, so you should
Mm-hmm.
take that at face value, but he does have a point. If nobody finds block space useful, Bitcoin as a network faces an existential crisis, and you can have WBTC on Ethereum or whatever.
Yeah, and that's kind of I like the way I see Bitcoin going now. Expanding the on-chain capacity is just not going to happen meaningfully enough to where people will be like, I'm going to send this on-chain. Like, you, what we will have to see, there's a few paths this would have to take. One, which this is the cynical sailor view, right? Where, well, the most cynical view is demand for block space and never materializes. Security goes down, people end up leaving Bitcoin, and Bitcoin goes to zero over time. That's option zero, the most cynical one. But option number one, the second most cynical, is the sailor path, which is Bitcoin. The demand for block space is just not there, other than to shuffle around from a few custodians. People use it as a custodial asset, but the security doesn't keep up, and so then you will have institutions such as custodians like MicroStrategy and things like that, but also governments will start to subsidize mining. So they will mine at a loss just so they can secure the network, in which case the network still works, but now it's compromised by big actors. First of all, what do you think of that potential path where it's the subsidized hash rate by custodians kind of thing?
I don't know. It doesn't seem like a very.
It's not good, but you think it's realistic.
Mining is driven by incentives, right? It's a very greedy activity. As a matter of fact, Bitcoin as a design focuses on human greed. Mining makes sense only because it's more profitable for you to join the system as opposed to trying to attack the system. That's the way in which Satoshi Nakamoto tried to solve the Byzantine general problem. So I don't see custodians or whoever is invested in Bitcoin trying to mine out of generosity. Or maybe that they will, because their investment is so tied to this network. But I think it's cheaper for them to just make some mental gymnastics and say, well, you invested in BTC. Who cares about Bitcoin, the network? Mm-hmm. It's been useful for a while. Why don't we move the coins on this proof of stake system? And you can actually earn interest on your coins if you stake them with us or whatever. I think that's a more likely scenario, because we are not dealing with entities that are friendly. We are dealing with entities that want to make US dollars. And I don't think wasting money on mining is making them US dollars. Maybe it's good for maintaining a facade for a while, but it's just not what's profitable for them. Mm-hmm. So if they do want to keep BTC alive, it makes more sense for them to move it to other networks and say, well, it's worth the same. Why do you care? You got here because you wanted more US dollars. We can make that happen. We can pump it to the moon. Well, who needs that Bitcoin network? It's pointless. We can have a backup of it. You can have that on a flash drive of the future if the block size remains small. It can be like a funny project to just store that on a flash drive and scan for artwork or whatever you find on the blockchain.
Yeah.
But the fee model and the revenue does not make much sense unless we find some utility, unless there is some use case that makes people want to do something with the Bitcoin network. Mm-hmm. And for a while, it was assumed that it's going to be opening Lightning channels until, well, people became disillusioned with running their own Lightning node. And that became more centralized. And now people just say, well, this Phoenix LSP is not so bad. I can just put some money in there. The payments don't fail. Sure, they take some fees. Sure, they can shut down their operation, and I'm gonna get my money back on chain. But it's. I think much of the spirit of being self-sovereign and not trusting any third parties is lost, and that reminds me of a meme from Rick and Morty, which is with Rick Sanchez having breakfast and building a robot. And the robot asks, what is my purpose? And in the cartoon, he says, you pass butter, and the robot becomes very depressed.
Oh, my God.
Well, The joke about this is that the robot asks, and the robot is the Lightning Network. The Lightning Network asks, "What is my purpose?" And Rick Sanchez says, "You get Bitcoiners to accept custodians."
Yeah, you shuffle amongst custodians. Well, that's sort of like the second path, right? Is Bitcoin becomes used as a wrapped asset on other chains. So WBTC is one kind of way, but I'm kind of more interested lately in something called the Threshold Network, which has kind of a more decentralized wrapping way where you could kind of use a similar vault technology to what Thorchain would use, for example. And you can wrap your version of Bitcoin on, say, Ethereum or Solana or whatever, do whatever you want, and then you can burn the token and release your actual Bitcoin on the actual Bitcoin chain. If there's stuff like that, then in order to say, no, this is actually Bitcoin you're using, the chains pay the premium of literally needing real Bitcoin into these pools to be able to then have wrapped versions. And in that case, depending on how popular it is, you could actually have enough demand for block space from just shuffling Bitcoin from one wrapping pool to unwrapping it in your own custody to another wrapping pool. Maybe enough of that shuffling around accounts for enough on-chain fees where you're like, listen, I want to dump 100 Bitcoin on to Threshold. And then you're willing to pay like, I don't know, half a Bitcoin in fees from that just to do it if you need to, for example. But maybe, unfortunately, even that situation, you would be incentivized to do as little as possible as far as on-chain activity. Or if you want to withdraw from it, maybe you'd want to batch a transaction. And either way, the fees get kind of minimized. And then the way three, I guess, or the third way would be if actual demand for block space for Bitcoin without necessarily moving it somewhere else is important. And at the current number of transactions you can have, it's absolutely not a case. But it seems like what some of these companies are trying to do, like LOP, etc., are expand the data limit so that they can actually do things that they find useful. Of these things, by the way, what that you know of, what are your most promising use cases if the core developers get their way and the opportune limit or the arbitrary data limit is removed? What are some of the coolest use cases you think could happen then at that point?
Well, if you put data on the blockchain, then you can use that for building layer twos. I think that's the most interesting use case. Of course, you can put JPEGs. Of course, you can put your stupid music. Or I think there's even an inscription where you can play Doom on the Bitcoin blockchain. But I don't think that makes Bitcoin any more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to build stuff. And I hope we get, I mean, at this point, I've sort of lost hope, but I still hope that we get some powerful covenant to let some of these frustrated developers build. Because I think Bitcoin is this place of very frustrated devs who have been working on test nets and signets and whatever and deploying on altcoins, and they say, this is ready for production. It's been tested for so many years, and then they get ignored. They get called shitcoiners. People make fun of them, and it sucks. You put so much of your life and time and energy into this, and then someone tells you, well, you're a shitcoiner. I don't want to run this on my node. Goodbye. It's very depressing. But I do hope that Bitcoin... So when you read the white paper, I think that's a very aspirational document. It shows what this was intended to be, but it did not become. The adoption of BTC, I think, is much worse than it was 10 years ago, when you had Expedia and Microsoft and Steam and all of these businesses accepting Bitcoin, maybe not directly, but using services like BitPay. Right now, you have just some small shops and services or intermediaries that are selling you gift cards. But there's far less direct adoption. And that's disappointing to see. and it's something that we need to work on. And unfortunately, the stable coins are sort of eating our lunch. They're offering
Absolutely.
the same user experience, but they're not free market money. They're trusted to a degree, and they're not censorship resistant. So I don't know where this is gonna go. I just hope that we do get something at this point. It's been such a boring 4 or 5 years for Bitcoin. Even I remember there was some excitement for Taproot, and that turned out to be such a disappointment. Like, can you think of a single use case? I was looking into, well, you can build some smart contracts, you can do complex multi-sigs, you can have some extra privacy because of this scripting language. And how much of that was actually built?
Nothing. I'm sure some things, but like not didn't amount to much. And that's the thing. It reminds me of SegWit, right? Where I remember during the SegWit days when people were arguing and people had like SegWit activation parties. Like I remember Charlie Shrem had this like party and everyone around the world like, yay, like we did a big thing. And whether SegWit was beneficial or necessary or not is a different story. But it certainly didn't do a lot. Like literally a parameter change of doubling the block size or quadrupling it simply would have done more materially for what Bitcoin does than SegWit. And I think that people were sold this giant narrative because, okay, well, we can increase the block size or we can go down this route that starts with SegWit. Because in order to fight this narrative, it was overhyped probably. And then it's like, well, what's next? Well, Lightning, it's coming, 18 months, all this stuff. And then, oh, but then next we need Taproot. Taproot's going to do the thing, and Schnorr signatures. And there's all these kind of like minor tinker kind of tweaks that were hyped to be world changing in order to keep people kind of excited. And I don't exactly, I think they kind of ran out of steam on that. I'm not sure if you got kicked out for a second there. There we go. Your camera's back on. You heard all my ramblings, though, right?
I think the first part. Sorry.
Yeah,
I don't know what went wrong. I think my internet crashed or something.
it happens to the best of us, and sometimes even for the worst of us. But all I was saying is that all these upgrades from SegWit to Schnorr to Taproot to Lightning were a little overhyped, and I think people might have upgrade hype fatigue at this point.
I don't know if it's upgrade fatigue. It's just that Taproot was promised as something that Satoshi might have planned, like to use Schnorr signatures instead of ECDSA.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much lobbying for it, even before it was ready, even when it was still like this project in development. And when it came out, it seemed obvious, like, yeah, we should do this. And it was sort of a disappointment because it did not include all the Schnorr libraries that were promised. And we were supposed to get something that's called CISA, Cross Input Signature Aggregation, as a follow-up to Taproot. It seems like everyone forgot about that one and we moved on. And right now we have Jeremy Rubin, who is sort of having his redemption arc. And I love to see it because he was subjected to a lot of slandering and borderline character assassination from some people who called him like a spook and someone who's trying to destroy Bitcoin, and this guy who's opening the gates of hell, bringing shitcoin use cases to Bitcoin and blah, blah, blah. And he turned out to be super right. And honestly, I hope that we get CDV. And I also believe that the reason why people from Blockstream were so violent towards it is that maybe they were jealous they did not write that themselves. Because Jeremy has been vindicated from a technical perspective. Like,
Yeah.
most builders look at his work and they say, well, he has the best design.
Yeah, that's probably true. Now, even with all these, proposed upgrades, don't you think it might be that they would be similar to Taproot in that people say, oh, look at all the cool things you can do if you build them, and then people build it, they upgrade it, and then, man, just nothing really changes and nothing crazy takes root.
No, it's different because there was no project that said, well, we can't launch on mainnet without Taproot. You know, it's just something that a few thinkers from the ivory tower were believing at the time that's going to be useful for the user. And I'm not saying it's not useful, it's just that we don't have all the tools for the normal user to find some actual benefit in that. And with all of these covenants, at least you have builders like the people working on Arc, which is supposed to be a more centralized but more efficient version of Lightning. The people working on ZK rollups, they need covenants because it's hard for me to explain right now, but they've been running on test nets. You can actually do drive chains with covenants too, but you don't get some of the protections provided by BIP 300 and 301, meaning that if the miners decide to steal, you can't organize with a majority of nodes to take the funds back. It's going to be much more difficult. You have to also get a majority of miners to oppose that. It gets nastier, but you can still build drive chains and see if there's market demand for this. And what's exciting is that if this happens, or when this happens, we're going to have a free market of layer 2s that are going to be able to compete on Bitcoin. And we haven't really had that. We've had Lightning, we've had Liquid. Liquid, you can argue, is just a federation. It's not a real sidechain. We can have actual competition for scaling Bitcoin. And that's far more exciting than agreeing that this should be the solution going forward and trying to make excuses for its failures and stuff like this. If there's going to be competition and you have multiple companies working on similar projects, not only that they build off of each other's efforts, but the weakest one is going to fail and the strongest one will get more users and make Bitcoin more useful to the world.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, what's his name? Adam McBride had this point that we sort of referenced. Let me just pop that up on the screen, where he just said the Bitcoin Core is about to pull off the biggest Trojan horse in history, where basically he seems to imply that Bitcoin not scaling would make it more palatable to institutions and governments because it's not a threat to the dollar, for example. But now that that is now that it is kind of entrenched in a lot of institutions, adding in increased transaction or data capacity, I should say, definitely not transaction capacity, would now kind of return it to its P2P cash roots. And snuck in, got there. I don't personally see how this makes sense, but I thought I'd throw it up there and see if you have any other opinions on it.
It's a lot of wishful thinking, to believe that these guys are so smart that they're not just technical wizards, but they're also capable of playing 4D chess with governments and financial institutions of the world. It can be beautiful if this happens, because the assumption is that in a few years, everyone's going to have skin in the game, and your grandma's pension fund is going to be tied to the price of Bitcoin, and you're going to have your parents also invested in Bitcoin. And at that point, it's going to get unleashed as a beast that competes with the financial system. And it's going to be difficult for the rest of the world to catch up. It's, I don't know. It's very nice to think about this. I don't think it's going to happen. In some ways, Bitcoin has been neutered. It doesn't have the same bite. It doesn't seem threatening. It's super friendly. You get celebrities endorsing it. If you try to watch that documentary, Thank God for Bitcoin, with Mark Cuban and a bunch of actors and musicians just saying, hey, Bitcoin is great, and this happened in 1971, and it sounds like an hour-long Bitcoin podcast, but with familiar faces. Very strange, but we're at a point where the normie has an idea about what Bitcoin is and how it works. And I don't think it's going to be the revolutionary instrument. anymore. I hope it's gonna be. I think about this a lot, but it's just very hard at this point to make any changes, and maybe we're gonna get this once a lot of people understand and demand that we're gonna get Bitcoin as the cypherpunk money. But the attitude overall is not very cypherpunk. And I don't want to criticize the core developers, but the maintainer or one of the maintainers of the project said that no controversial changes are going to get merged into the project. So, what does controversial even mean? Just a bunch of Karens crying. I think that's enough. Just
Yeah.
crying about it and then trying to write some news articles about why this is horrible and maybe trying to give a bad name to everyone trying to improve Bitcoin in a certain way. And that's the end of it. They're going to say, well, this is controversial. We're not doing it anymore. So
Yeah.
we need a change of culture before we need any technical change. That's my take on it.
Well, for sure. And as I pointed out in this post here, where I just said, like, basically the funny thing about this is you have people fighting over, as you mentioned earlier, staying up all night, not sleeping, not seeing their children, whatever, over money they don't even use. While they have they're using fiat every single day and the banks every single day. And so
That's funny because these guys are communists, right? They claim
yes.
that they have control over something they don't want to pay for. They say, well, the mempool is only for this and the block space should be used for that. And I'm like, are you paying for it?
Yeah.
Shut the hell up. You're not paying for anything. You just want that to be available for yourself, hypothetically, but you're not even transacting, you're hodling. And then you get angry when other people try to use the network.
Yes. As I said, it's like a couple of fast food junkies. They're fighting over whether salad dressings have seed oils in them or not. It's like, well, you're not eating salad, so why are you fighting over the quality of the dressing in the salad? But it is kind of funny because I I think it'd be interesting to tell the transactions per node of these people, right? As far as first of all, I wonder how many of the op Karens, as we'll call them, I wonder how many of the op Karens run their own node, and of those who do run their own node, I wonder how many transactions per year they make, actual Bitcoin transactions. And it's kind of interesting because like running a node is a religious tenet to a certain extent, but I wonder kind of like it's to validate your own transactions, but do you make the transactions that you claim to validate? It's kind of interesting.
I have a friend, and he was doing some graphics for me at one point, and he had this dogmatic view on not using the base layer unless the transaction is larger than a few $1,000s. So for himself, it made no sense. He was using Lightning custodially, and he was saying, well, it's good enough for myself because I have this vanity address and people know that they can send to me, and I trust that this Galoy guy or whatever the business was is someone I know in person and is not going to rug me. And it goes back to that Rick and Morty meme with the robot, right? Because Lightning is very difficult technically for self custody and sovereign use cases. And most people just give up and they say, well, I can use with small amounts and I'm going to bring back the good old banking system for this use case. And it's really depressing because these guys got psyoped into not using Bitcoin anymore, and they're so happy with their custodial Lightning wallets, and they say, "Well, I can do microtransactions, I can do this, I can do that. I get sender privacy. Have you heard of sending privacy in Bitcoin? No, you haven't. But at the same time, they're not securing the network. They're not paying the miners. In order for their layer 2 to be secure, the base layer must be very robust and the miners must be happy collecting fees. And that hasn't really happened. And I remember last year we had the Bitcoin halving. The fees were insane. It was more than $100 for one transaction fee. Not sure if you remember. A lot of people were trying to get into the next block at the time, and you had all of these NFT collections trying to get deployed.
Yeah. I remember it was not this past Christmas, but the Christmas before then, I helped a friend schedule his UTXO consolidation transaction. And Christmas Day is historically the lowest fee day because people are doing Christmas things. And he still paid $882 for a single transaction because he'd gotten paid a bunch of different times over the years by smaller payments. And now it was a lot. But those days are probably behind us at this point. The transaction fees aren't really very high. I did regrettably have to use a Bitcoin transaction yesterday to test something out, and it took a long time, but it was reasonable. But one thing I found kind of interesting, because with this whole the Op Karen takeover sort of thing, usually this is where I would go when there's some drama or argue that people are fighting over. I usually go to Polymarket if it's a thing, if it's something that's like a big enough news item. Now, let me actually look up. I highly doubt that there will be everything is Bitcoin price, or will it be a strategic reserve or something like that? There's nothing technical on Polymarket. So my next thing is CoinDance. Coin.dance/nodes. And if you go there, you can see the historical adoption of different nodes by implementations over the years for Bitcoin. You can see all the different ones. There was it's pretty much been Bitcoin Core has been the domination for a while. Around 2022, you had a high in Bitcoin Knots nodes, which was still negligible. And then it went away. And then now you see a resurgence in Knots where you have Bitcoin Core nodes that's 20,000 and Bitcoin Knots is 828. So it's still almost 20 times or over 20 times the number of Bitcoin Core nodes versus Bitcoin Knots. Now, despite what people will say, what the Op Karens will say, I don't think this matters personally.
No, it doesn't. That's the funny part. They think that if they deploy more nodes, they have more authority, or that Bitcoin is a democracy. No, it's not. Nobody cares about your node.
It's
not an economic node. Nobody cares about what you have to say unless you're a large business or a payments processor, or you make a lot of money, and you have some sort of lobby over the core developers that you want stuff to be in a certain way. But if you're just a guy with a Raspberry Pi who decides to buy another Raspberry Pi over the weekend to run Knots once again and prove that there are more nodes, nobody's gonna take that seriously.
Yeah,
I can rent like 100 servers on DigitalOcean and deploy Knots on all of them. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Now, what I think that people were kind of tricked because this was touted as something that did do something during the block size wars, during the UASF days. People running this stuff and wearing the hats. They said that that's what people running nodes are what defeated the evil Roger Ver people. But in my opinion, obviously technically it's a different story, but from observing there, it was a successful, I guess, bluff where people saw a lot of people posting about nodes changing, and then there were you saw a little spike in people running non-core software, whatever. And people got scared because they thought that represented real customers doing something different, real Bitcoin users changing, and they're like, oh no, we don't want to do that. And now people got duped into saying, it worked the first time, but that's not what worked. It was the bluffing of real economic activity leaving the chain if they increase the block size. And now you have the same bluff, but it would be funny if we could get a group of people together to run a bunch of Bitcoin Knots nodes just for the chaos, just to see that number go up, because if it goes high enough, people will start writing about it. There will be articles about it. There will be posts about it. There will be people screenshotting, be like, we're winning, guys. Everyone keep doing this. And if you pump the Bitcoin Knots, if it gets over 50%, what if you actually eclipse the number of core nodes, even if it's just a complete empty Sybil attack? You just dump it on the network. It could be enough to reverse this decision, not because it actually matters from a technical perspective, but because it matters as a bluff to make it seem like this is a deeply unpopular thing and people will, and if there will be a hard fork, and Bitcoin Core will be on the minority of the hard fork. And that's kind of the bluff. Because I am a semi-ethical human being, I don't think I will be doing that. But if I didn't have my ethics, I would absolutely love to watch the world burn and just orchestrate this just to see what happens.
I don't know. At the end of the day, I think Bitcoin Core is a technocracy.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have the high priests deciding that they should silence or ignore what this loud but otherwise insignificant majority is saying. I think they tried something similar when there was Bitcoin Unlimited, Bitcoin ABC, Bitcoin Classic XT. You had all of these different clients that were trying to get traction, and they did not, and they became part of the Bitcoin Cash fork in the end.
Yeah, the interesting part about all that, because I was kind of paying attention back then as well, was minor signaling for these things. I remember, because I did watch these graphs pretty much daily at the time when the block size wars were going down. I believe at one point, like miners explicitly signaling support for Bitcoin Core versus Bitcoin. I think it was, I can't remember if it was unlimited or classic. It was one of those things that was the highest. I think Bitcoin Core was something like 54%, and the big block one was like 40%. And this was from hash rate signaling. So this was actual mining power, and it did get pretty close. And then after the New York agreement happened, and they agreed, we'll do SegWit, but we'll also do 2x, the block size. Then miner support signaling for, SegWit and stuff just went to like 90+%, like overnight kind of thing. But so yeah, and in the end, they got kind of intimidated into backing off. But then that's kind of where we ended up now, is this situation. And so Bitcoin Core is the implementation. It's what people use, and it will be. And these kinds of, I guess the final prediction on that, do you think we will see anything resembling a chain split over this?
Yeah. But I think they're going to try their best to minimize the damages, but these people are so deep into their dogma that they're not going to take a no for an answer.
Mm-hmm.
They're so emotional about this that I think they're going to want to have their own chain. Because how can there be anything else other than the types of transactions that they want on their nodes? And Luke Dash Jr. pushed this so far that he said it's rape, that you're putting data that you want on somebody else's computer. You're raping his computer in a peer-to-peer system, which is designed to do this. You're supposed to store somebody else's transactions when you're running a node. And Luke himself has put some Bible verses on the Bitcoin blockchain in a different era that he's trying to right now make people forget about. But I don't know, it's really crazy. I hope there's no chain split, honestly, because
It could be destructive a little bit.
it's gonna be destructive because the framing and the narratives are gonna be that Bitcoin Core has been co-opted by shitcoiners, and this is the pure Bitcoin, and this is the one that's doing what it's supposed to do, and maybe they're gonna have 333 kilobyte blocks to make Luke happy. It's just that it's such a small minority of supporters who are very vocal, and I suppose that they have investors and they have people behind them who are gonna say, well, maybe that's not such a good idea. Or maybe that they're going to get encouraged. Like, hey, fork off. Come on. I want to dump my coins. I want to have like an easy money vehicle. Like, I'm going to make sure this gets listed on some exchange, and then I can sell it and make some money. I'm going to accumulate more Bitcoin just before the fork, and then go on vacation for like 6 months. And everyone's going to forget about this, hopefully, by then.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's really crazy. I'm sorry that we ended up here somehow. the conversation is not new. It's been had before in the upturn wars, and the consequence of it was that builders went to Ethereum. I think they're counting on a similar outcome, except that this time around, the market incentives are not on their side. If they don't change anything about the maximum size for inscriptions, upper turn data, then you're going to have mining pools doing it anyway. And what this leads to is a perversion of the incentives for Bitcoin miners. You can basically go to a mining pool and tell them, well, I want to unload this amount of data. I'm going to be paying 1 sat per VByte on the main chain when I inscribe this. And when you pick up this transaction, and I want you to pick it up, I'm going to pay you in US dollars in cash or whatever. Which means that there's going to be less money that gets paid to the Bitcoin network directly. And there's less transparency about what's happening with the Bitcoin mempool. This is going to lead to a scenario where maybe mining pools are going to expect some, or maybe you're going to have mining pools that only accept transactions for which the users have paid in advance.
Yeah, do you remember, was it via BTC had a transaction accelerator? Do you remember that back in the day? I don't know if...
and I think right now it's much more popular. A lot of services have that.
Yeah.
Mempool.space has one.
And it's funny because I remember when I was running a Lightning node, I couldn't figure out, it was a pain, right? And I couldn't get enough channel capacity, enough people to connect to me. So in order to get enough inbound capacity, Bitrefill was offering some services for a Lightning channel. And so I do remember I paid Bitrefill with Dash to open up a Lightning channel to my node so I could get it to work. And it was kind of fun, a funny bit of irony there, where it is kind of funny when, like, it's kind of okay. I understand people who don't want to use crypto to buy their everyday things in the meat space, in the real world, right? I understand. I mean, I think if you care about freedom money, you should use it for everything. But the thing that's the thing that's too far is when people pay for things internally with exterior money. So, for example, if you pay for a Bitcoin transaction fee in not Bitcoin, that makes 0 sense. Like you use fiat to pay for that. Or if, what's his name? Jack Dorsey's selling a Bitcoin hardware wallet and he won't take Bitcoin for it. It's like at least your internal,
that's so funny.
internal stuff should all be paying. Like if you're opening a Lightning channel, you should pay in Bitcoin for that. Well, I couldn't, And so internally you should do that. Like if you're minting an NFT or a shitcoin on Solana, you should pay Sol for that. That's the gas fee. You should at least do the internal stuff. And I think that was one of those reasons why Ethereum did really well during the NFT boom, is because everything was priced in ETH to mint, to sell and stuff on OpenSea and everything. And so you needed ETH to do that. And that's actually why one of the very best tools for paying all your bills in crypto in the US is called Spritz. And the reason why the founder created it is because he was a DeFi guy and he wanted to offload his DeFi gains into the real world. And rather than go through all those hoops, he just set up a thing where you could just take whatever token he wanted and just pay his bills with it. And so that's kind of where we get these network effects. So it is kind of interesting having like the transaction accelerator or whatever. People will pay for whatever, works. But yeah, that's quite the long ramble on the whole Bitcoin stuff. Let's sort of wrap this thing up talking about ETHDAM, right? And let me throw that up on the screen. ETHDAM or CryptoDAM. They wanted to change it, but they didn't yet, I guess. ETHDAM, May 9 through 11 in Amsterdam, brought together by bringing together the best privacy, security, and AI builders in crypto for a 48-hour hackathon. And a bunch of cool sponsors here, a bunch of good stuff. Let me hit up the speaker list because there's a big list of people. Obviously, at the top is Alexei Pertsev, the persecuted Tornado Cash guy. Amin Soleimani, of course. Aaron Day is a friend of mine, big into anti-CBDC, also living off of crypto. Justin Bonds, Sal the Agorist, Edge Wallet, all kinds of different people. I recruited a few fun people for this as well. So first of all, is this your first time going to ETHDAM?
It's my first time going to an Ethereum conference, period.
Yeah, well, I guess this would be the first one to go to because it's not that much of an Ethereum conference. I spoke there. This will be my third year in a row speaking there, and none of those times did I really bring up Ethereum too much. But it's a fun time for sure. It's May 9 through 11, and obviously in Amsterdam. Some people have asked me, where is it? And I'm like, well, it's a secret. No, it's not a secret. It's in Amsterdam. If anyone wants to come, I might have a couple of tickets left to give out if you can make it to Amsterdam. I cannot pay your travel and all that stuff. Get a job, you hobo. But if you are already showing up, you have Hilawi in the chat saying, can't wait to go. He's going to be there. He's a long time supporter of the podcast and fan of both of ours and a very good friend of mine, of course. I have to admit, I did sort of, because of all these different conferences, it's great to meet people in the meet space. Of all the crypto conferences I've ever been to, ETHDAM has been my favorite so far, and I really like the organizers. They're good people. I did purposefully stack it a little bit, where I invited everyone I liked kind of that I could and just said, hey, do you want to speak? Hey, Eleanor, can you add him as a speaker, et cetera, et cetera. And so we got a good group of, it's going to be sort of like Avengers Infinity War where everyone comes together at the end, and it's gonna, there will be some epic group photos. So you should definitely be there. Is there anyone in particular, Vlad, you are excited to see there?
You put me on the spot here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna try to be diplomatic and say, well, it's been a year since I last saw you, Joel. So
That's good.
I really want to see you.
Very nice.
I don't know. I took a look at the speakers list. I do want to watch some presentations. I'm gonna be moderating a panel. But I don't think so. When I go to conferences, I think my approach nowadays is to just stay there in the lobby and talk with people as opposed to watching talks,
Yeah.
being next to the stage. I think that's the part that you can watch at home when you return. So
Yeah,
I
for
look
sure.
forward to interacting with people and learning more about what's happening in the privacy space. I don't have any plans. I try to approach this like a child sometimes. and just
Organically.
try to make the most of it without any plans, because if I do make plans, I'm going to be disappointed always, especially in events which are on the medium large size where people can't really commit. I look forward to meeting Paul Pewey again from Edge Wallet. He was really nice when I saw him in Mexico. And the people from Edge, they seem to be liking my podcast too. Let's see if there's going to be any collaboration out of it.
Yeah, that'd be nice. The Edge folks are very solid. Love Paul. Been a friend of his before Edge existed. Back when it was called Airbits, I was an Airbits user back in the day, and definitely, I tend to see Paul at a lot of conferences actually because of kind of the overlap in interests as far as these kinds of principles. But I do agree with the whole show up to conferences to do. I rarely go to talks. The only time I go to a talk is if there's a good friend of mine who I want to support. But other than that, I do go for the people, the networking. Networking is such a vulgar term, right? As far as I go to any conference mostly based on who's going to be there. And just because there's nothing quite like hanging out with a bunch of people who are on the same mission as you and getting real work done. And so, thanks to the one, I saw Ken Bozak at, at Rare Evo last year. and he shared it. He has his little camera here that he had, and so I got one too for in-person interviews, and I'm going to be using that and chatting with a bunch of people. So even
Is
though
that the DJI?
yes, it's the Pocket 2. It's the not the latest. I think there's like a 3 or maybe even a 4 by now. But it works well, and I got some good microphones, just clip on. It works well. And I recorded something in a super noisy environment at Web3 Amsterdam and used some basic AI tools to cut out the background noise, and it worked perfectly.
The one from Adobe?
It was something free. I didn't pay for it. So I actually have to see what I use because I got to use it again soon. But yeah, basically just it worked out really well. And, I have a couple of, I don't know if you can see, I'm going to move my microphone for a second. That light behind me, a little glow stick light that I have from my background here. I'm going to bring a couple there in case I need to light up the room. Maybe I'll do a custom color for every interview. You get the orange for the Bitcoin person, or the blue for the Dash person, or the Litecoin person, or red for the Monero person. But I'll try to get a few interviews in. It's definitely going to be a busy time. So everyone should come to ETHDAM. And anything you want to shell other than your awesome podcast?
I've been working on a manga comic book with my girlfriend, and it's gonna be called Bitcoin Year One. The plan was to have it ready for Amsterdam, but I think we're just gonna have like 50% of the content if anyone is interested in that. And it tells the story of what happened in the first year of Bitcoin's existence, from the conversations on the cryptography mailing list, which I think are super underrated, with Ray Dillinger and James A. Donald and a bunch of others. Fun fact, Zuko, I think he's also a watcher of this show. Hi, Zuko.
Hello,
I'm a big fan.
Zuko.
He was also on the cryptography mailing list, and on the same day that Hal Finney replied, Zuko was on another thread telling people, well, you shouldn't talk about financial politics here, or something along these lines. And he mentioned in his message that he has been involved in 2 previous attempts to create Chaumian and eCash, and he's working on a third. So Zuko might be Satoshi, right?
Yes, I know we've discussed that before, and he said he doesn't agree with that. But sounds like something Satoshi would say. It is kind
But
of
something that's exciting also in the first year of Bitcoin, and sorry for cutting you off,
no problem.
just remember your thought, is that a lot of people believe that the first transaction from a mobile wallet happened in Berlin in room 77. And I think it was this guy, Andreas Schildbach, who built the first wallet. And that's not the case. In 2010, in December, basically almost 1 year, no, it was 2009, sorry, in December, there was someone who bought the Nokia N900 and was able to port Bitcoin QT to run on the Nokia phone. And he
Damn.
also got someone else to buy the same phone and run the Bitcoin software, and they sent a transaction from one to the other. And that's the first time when Bitcoin was used on a mobile phone and a transaction happened. And they also tested that for mining, and they wanted to see what's the hash rate and what are the odds of finding a block with that one. I don't think they found any blocks, but it was a very beautiful era of experimentation about which we don't know that much. And I was happy to dig up some random facts and put them in a form factor that's easy to digest and is funny sometimes, because it's a comic book and it has bubbles with dialogues as opposed to just sentences that you have to read one after the other. And I hope some normies are going to pick it up and learn, or some Bitcoiners are going to pick it up and remember what this was about and understand that I don't think there's any way some NSA agent put out this computer code and left it out in the wild, because there are so many moments when Satoshi messed up
Yeah.
and he was being patronized, or he was feeling insecure. You can find that in the email exchanges with Marty Malmy, for example.
Yeah, and that's one thing, like, not to wax poetic about this stuff, humans really love to worship things. They love immaculate things. And there's a lot of immaculate religious undertone in the Bitcoin story, the virgin birth. Oh, it's perfect. It can never be replicated. And there's also a little bit of a cynical version of that is the conspiracy theory thing, which is everything had to be this like machination. Oh, do you know the government actually did this? They set this thing up, this thing, and it's all fake, right? It's still, that's kind of a form of like cynical negative worship. But I think a lot of that is disrespectful to the beauty and magic of real, regular, flawed human beings pulling off amazing things. And there's this like mythos of Satoshi's this like incredible mythical figure, this that. Like Satoshi for sure was an incredible person in a lot of ways, but still a person. And it was a cypherpunk nerd like the rest of us that had a vision and did things to the best of their ability and experimentation like so many thousands have done. This one tended to be the one that worked and did their best. And who knows why Satoshi disappeared or not, but it was a real person that did a real innovation, made real mistakes and shortcomings, but really changed the world. And I think that that's the Bitcoin story is one of ultimate empowerment, where one person or one small group of people built some open source software that changed the entire world. And it wasn't because these people were magical or Satoshi was probably a genius, but not an inhuman level of genius. It should tell us that that could be us. Any one of us could make this big of an impact on the world. And it's same thing with like Vitalik. Like again, many of us met Vitalik when he was just a kid doing Bitcoin Magazine. Many, people knew his dad. Like these are real people that all of a sudden, wow, look at all the money he has. Oh wow, look at all the effects of this. And like Ross Ulbricht, there's so many people I know like him who built stuff like that. Maybe not to the same scale, success and ambition, but he's become a mythical figure in the crypto world because of his innovation. He provided the first big use case for crypto commerce. And then he was also the first big martyr for the cause. And he's now a real person again. He's back out into the world as a real person. And I really think that there's, like, for example, a good friend of mine, Chris Pacia, was the lead backend developer of OpenBazaar, which, again, another Silk Road style thing. And again, I know Chris. He's absolutely a genius. I love the guy. But he's also a person, just a regular person like the rest of us. And I think that this whole like mythos of, oh, it's an NSA thing or whatever, it kind of like spits on the hard work of real people that just made this thing and didn't know if it was going to work, but it did work and it turned into stuff no one ever imagined.
There's also an article on LinkedIn that Ray Dillinger posted in 2017. It's called something like "If Only We Knew What We Were Starting" or something like that. And that's where he reveals that he was one of the reviewers of the first version of the Bitcoin code. And the way in which he describes Satoshi is that he looked at his invention just the way that he looks at his PhD students who come to him and they say, well, I have this thesis for this idea. And that he perceived Satoshi to be a genuine and curious mind who just wanted to build something. So by the writings of people who were there and had interactions with Satoshi and looked at the code and received emails from him, the general impression that is that he was a young man who was trying really hard to get his idea across, and he contacted the veterans of this space, the cypherpunks, the people who were hanging out talking about cryptography, and wanted to get some validation that the idea is any good.
Yeah.
And also the insecurity that Satoshi had when WikiLeaks was being funded with Bitcoin and the way that he disappeared. I mean, he didn't seem to be much of a fighter, and he didn't seem to be very confident in what he
Yeah.
put out.
Or at least confident that he'd stay out of prison. And that's kind of an important thing because we've sort of seen this where you have, whether it's Russ Ulbricht, whether it's the Cornado Cash developers, whether it's my friend Mark Hopkins or Ian Friedman or people like that who have sold Bitcoin. There's always these, most of us have been fine, but there's key people who've just gone to prison. And we've moved past like the fact that Ross Ulbricht is free because the sitting president just decided, he turned him into a mini celebrity, got him out of prison. That's not guaranteed to happen. And so I think like Satoshi designed the way Satoshi acted was an interesting way because you definitely see that he thought he could go to prison for this or be murdered for this. And I do think that even though if Satoshi popped out today, maybe that wouldn't be the case. But at the time, that was a very real risk. And like Charlie Lee, as far as I know, as like the next big founder of anything that you could remember, I mean, I forget who even did Namecoin, but Namecoin's kind of gone. But Charlie Lee, I don't think ever feared he was going to prison because he did Litecoin. And I think that that's because Satoshi was survived by being hidden. So you have Evan Duffield doing Dash, you have Vitalik doing Ethereum, you have, Charles Hoskinson doing Cardano. All these other founders are in the light because Satoshi was in the darkness first and survived. And I think if Satoshi had been out in the light, probably there wouldn't be the rest of this because it would be sort of shut down pretty quickly. But yeah, this is turning into like the waxing poetic hour, which is always fun. But probably a good time to wrap this thing up. Everyone follow the Vlad Costea on X. Follow the Bitcoin Takeover podcast and show up to ETHDAM or at least watch the virtual streams. And yeah, if you're still watching this, you could probably also like and subscribe if you haven't already. And this will be the last Digital Cash rundown for the month of May, probably the first and last. I'm probably going to be traveling every single other Friday up until June. So I'll see you back in June live, but I'll be live shit posting on X, etc. And I will still be uploading in-person interviews that I'll be doing at all these conferences. I should have a big stack of those. I already have a couple of the queue, so it should be good. And
that's actually a Smashing Pumpkins lyric. Like, I should go see you in June. It's from the song Rhinoceros from their first album.
I'm going to post that now. I'm going to look that up and post it. I forgot about that. Yeah, parting word. What do you say?
Parting word. Come to ETHDAM. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm not sure if there's going to be a live stream of the presentations.
Yeah,
but
I
if
think
that one is available, then watch it. It doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah, costs you your internet subscription, but that's about it.
And your time, which is only your most valuable resource in this world.
Yes, but you could be on TikTok, so turn off TikTok for about a couple hours over the next week and watch a couple of your favorite talks. Or an hour. Commit to an hour, right? All right, everyone, have a great weekend. Taxation is theft. Your phone is spying on you. Fiat's a scam. Live on crypto before it's too late. And subscribe to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. See you guys around. Bye-bye.